It started with rules. Simple ones. Go to class, keep your head down, avoid anything that distracts you from your goals. I made those rules to protect myself, from chaos, from people, from feelings. They worked. Until the day she sat across from me in the library and asked, "Is this seat taken?" Her voice was soft, but confident, like she already knew the answer. I didn't look up at first. I just nodded. That's when she pulled out a notebook and opened it beside mine. Nothing about her felt ordinary. I told myself she was just another professor. That nothing would happen, that I wouldn't let it. But then one night, while we were studying, she leaned in closer, the room quiet except for the ticking clock and turning pages. Her breath touched my ear as she whispered, "Professor, you've got to let yourself breathe." It was teasing, light-hearted. But it didn't feel like a joke. Something shifted inside me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at her, really stare, and realize that I had no rule for this. Every day on campus was a repetition of control. Wake up, study, attend class, eat alone, go back to my room. Repeat. It wasn't a punishment. I liked it that way. Predictable, safe, especially after last year, when everything spiraled and I almost lost my scholarship. That was the final push to put walls around my world. No friends, no parties, no feelings, just focus. That day in the library wasn't supposed to be any different. It was just another late evening with too many books and not enough caffeine. I was tracing highlighter across a thick psychology text when I heard the chair scrape beside me. I expected a student, maybe someone looking for a plug or peace and quiet. Instead, it was her. She wore a loose gray sweater and round glasses that slid just a little down her nose. A clipboard and an iced coffee in her hands. She looked too young to be a professor, but too self-assured to be a student. I remember thinking that her eyes moved like she already knew everything I was going to say before I said it. "You're the one always sitting in this corner, right?" she asked, no hesitation in her tone. I nodded, unsure if I should respond beyond that. She introduced herself casually, Drive. Reyes, visiting from another university for a semester. Teaching assistant, technically, but she'd been invited to co-lecture a few classes. That explained the air of quiet authority. I should have gone back to my book. I should have kept quiet, but when she leaned over my notes and smiled at the way I organized my diagrams, something in me stirred. Maybe curiosity, maybe something more. For the next week, she kept showing up. Always with a new question. Always with a reason to sit beside me. I told myself it was coincidence. That she was just being friendly. I wasn't used to people noticing me, let alone someone like her. Someone who looked at you like they saw everything and weren't scared of any of it. One night, as we worked side by side on a case study analysis, I felt her shoulder brush mine. Light, unintentional, maybe, but enough to make my breath catch. I shifted in my seat, flustered, and dropped my pen. She picked it up, handed it to me without a word, her fingers grazing mine longer than necessary. And then she whispered it, playfully, like a dare. "Professor." It didn't matter that it wasn't true. That I wasn't the professor. The way she said it made my chest tighten. My world, my carefully designed world of logic and order, suddenly felt like it was bending. Like something new, something dangerous, was pushing against the walls I'd built. I told myself it was nothing. Just a word, just a joke, but I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the assignment. Because of her voice. Her smile. That whisper echoing in my mind. I didn't plan on seeing her again the next day, but there she was, waiting by the psychology department doors with 2 coffees in her hands. One was my usual. I didn't remember telling her what I drank, but she handed it to me like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You looked like you could use this yesterday," she said, brushing her hair back, sunlight catching in her eyes. I took the cup, trying not to let my fingers shake. Our department had announced a small joint project between visiting faculty and senior students. Something about bridging research gaps and offering mentorship opportunities. When they posted the pairings, I stared at the list too long. My name was right there under hers. We were going to be working on a cognitive empathy analysis together. 3 weeks. Daily meetings. Close work. We met that afternoon in a study room with walls made of glass. She had her notes already printed and color-coded. I admired her preparation, even while my thoughts were tangled. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, from anyone. Let alone someone whose opinion I cared about more than I was ready to admit. At first, we stuck to the topic. She asked about my understanding of mirror neurons, and I gave textbook answers. But then she'd smile at something I said, like I'd surprised her, and that smile would drag me out of my comfort zone. She had a way of turning academic questions into personal ones. Have you ever felt someone's emotions like they were yours? She asked once. I didn't answer. Not really, but I remembered my mom crying in the kitchen 2 years ago after my dad left. The way I couldn't breathe even though I said nothing. Maybe that's what she meant. The project took on a rhythm. She'd meet me with coffee or tea, depending on how tired I looked. We'd sit, talk, analyze cases, compare theories. But always, somewhere in the conversation, it drifted. She'd ask things like, why do you always sit near the emergency exit? Or, do you ever let people in? It wasn't prying. She asked like she already knew the answer, like she was just waiting for me to be ready. We started staying later, past the time when most students left. The lights dimmed on timers, and we'd laugh when they flickered off, using our phone flashlights to keep working. Her voice was softer then, her laughter warmer. I found myself studying the curve of her mouth when she explained something, not because I didn't understand, but because I wanted to hear her speak longer. One night, she mentioned a paper she'd written back in her first year. I asked if I could read it. She hesitated, then emailed it to me anyway. It was about how emotional closeness affects intellectual growth. I stayed up reading every word. She wrote like she felt everything. Deeply. Maybe that's why I couldn't stop thinking about her. The next day, I told her I liked it. She didn't say thank you. She just looked at me for a long moment and said, I think you feel more than you let on. I looked away, scared she'd see too much. That evening, when I left the library, I checked behind me without meaning to. She wasn't there, and I missed her. I started noticing the little things. How my mornings shifted just slightly because I hoped to run into her. How I checked my clothes twice, as if she might care what I wore. I had never done that for anyone before, not even for myself. My world had always been neat, practical, under control. But she had this quiet way of undoing me without even trying. I began slipping in small ways. Nothing dramatic, just enough to feel the change. I'd linger after class, pretend to reread a paragraph just to stay near her a bit longer. I stopped avoiding the student lounge, because sometimes she'd be there, drinking tea and talking to other assistants. She never looked like she was trying to impress anyone. But people always noticed her. Especially me. One afternoon, while we were reviewing a particularly dry study, I lost track of what she was saying. I watched her fingers trace under a line of text, watched her brow crease when she focused. She caught me staring. I looked away quickly, pretending to write something down, heart pounding like I'd done something wrong. You're quiet today, she said after a moment. Just tired, I lied. She didn't press. She never did. And maybe that's what got to me the most. She let me come to her on my own time, never pulling, never rushing. It was the kind of patience I wasn't used to. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, laptop open, textbook untouched. Instead, I replayed the week in my head. The way she said my name like it was something soft. The way she didn't treat me like a project or a student or someone broken. She just saw me, and that terrified me more than anything. I remember the day I first made my rules. After everything fell apart at home, my father leaving, my mother unraveling, me trying to hold everything together, I told myself I wouldn't get too close to anyone again. People came with mess, with loss. I didn't want any of that. So I built a life around logic. Around staying ahead, staying focused, staying out of reach. But she didn't ask me to let her in. She just kept showing up. In small moments. In thoughtful gestures. In the way her eyes lingered just a second longer than they had to. I didn't know what to do with that. One evening, after we'd finished outlining our case summary, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You're really good at this," she said. "At what?" "At seeing what's underneath. You notice things." I shrugged, unsure how to take the compliment. "You do too." She smiled, and then said quietly, "Maybe that's why I like being around you." It was the first time she said anything that direct. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt tight. All I managed was a nod, like it meant nothing. But when I got back to my room that night, I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and let her words echo in the silence. "Maybe that's why I like being around you." I kept hearing it, over and over, and no matter how many times I reminded myself of the rules I'd made, I couldn't stop wondering what might happen if I broke them. Whispers started floating around campus, low and careless, but sharp enough to cut if you were listening. I didn't want to believe they were about us, but they were. A classmate nudged me one day, half laughing, "You and Dr. Reyes seem close." I forced a smile, made some excuse about study hours, and walked away before the flush in my face could speak for me. I didn't tell her. I didn't know how. Maybe I didn't want to see how she'd react. But it didn't stop there. Someone posted a vague tweet with our department tagged, something about favoritism and blurred lines. Nothing named, nothing obvious, but it tightened the air around me. I started checking over my shoulder more often. Started worrying about every glance, every word exchanged in public. The next time we met, I was tense, and she noticed. Of course she did. "What's going on?" she asked, not unkindly. "Nothing," I said too quickly. She didn't push. She just nodded, but her silence spoke louder than questions ever could. We continued our research, but the ease between us had thinned. I hated that I let it happen, but I couldn't help it. The fear was real. The rules I'd lived by weren't just about emotional distance, they were about protection. This felt dangerous now, not because of her, but because of what people saw when they looked at us. Later that evening, she sent me a message, "We don't have to keep meeting if it's too much." I stared at it for a long time. Something in my chest cracked open. I didn't want to stop seeing her. I just didn't know how to carry this weight without breaking. I typed, deleted, and retyped a dozen responses before finally sending, "I want to keep working together. I just need to figure out how to breathe through all this." She replied almost immediately, "Then let's figure it out together." The next day, she brought me tea instead of coffee. "Something calming," she said with a small smile. We didn't talk about the rumors. We didn't need to. She found ways to pull me back into the project, into the safe space we'd built between books and ideas and quiet understanding. And slowly, my guard began to lower again. That week, something changed. It wasn't dramatic or loud. Just small shifts in how we existed beside each other. I let myself smile more when she spoke. She let her hand linger longer when passing me notes. Our conversations drifted more often toward real things, memories, fears, what-ifs. One evening, she told me about her first year teaching. How lost she felt. How a student once told her she made them feel seen. "I think that's what I want most," she said. "To make people feel less invisible." I looked at her then, for a long time. "You do," I said quietly. "You do that without even trying." She looked away, almost shyly, and that moment settled between us like a thread tying something invisible but real. I walked home that night feeling less afraid. The rumors hadn't stopped, but she hadn't left. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to run anymore. The student event was nothing special on paper, just a weekend seminar organized by the department, a half day of presentations and shared research. But she volunteered us both to help with setup and registration. "It'll be good to get out of the library," she said with a smirk. I wanted to argue, to hide like usual, but something in me craved the change. And maybe I just wanted more time around her, even if it meant stepping into the open. We spent the morning arranging tables and sorting name tags. She made small jokes, mostly about how no one reads the welcome packets. I laughed, really laughed, and it surprised both of us. That easy kind of joy hadn't felt natural to me in a long time. During the event, we sat side by side through panel after panel. She took notes diligently, occasionally nudging me when something sparked a thought. I watched how people looked at her, how respected she was, how confident and composed. And still, when she turned to speak to me, her voice softened. Like I was the only one who mattered in the room. At lunch, she handed me a sandwich and a drink, already knowing my order from earlier conversations. I looked at her for a moment, holding the sandwich but not moving. "You remember the little things," I said. "I notice you," she answered simply, not waiting for praise, not even looking at me when she said it. Just putting the moment out there, like truth didn't need attention, it just needed to be said. Something about that day changed me. Maybe it was how she stayed close without pushing, or how she helped everyone without needing recognition. Or maybe it was just the way she looked at me, like I mattered more than I believed I did. I found myself doing the same, watching for signs of her mood, her needs, even her tired eyes near the end of the day. I brought her a coffee the next morning. She smiled so wide I felt it in my chest. We kept meeting for our project, but the space between us felt warmer now. Safe. One evening, after a long discussion on emotional cognition, she paused and looked at me seriously. "You ever think about how some people just get under your skin, even when you're trying to be careful?" I nodded slowly. "I think about that a lot lately." Her smile was soft but knowing. "I thought you might." I wanted to say something more, something honest and real. But the words stayed stuck behind fear. Still, I knew something important had shifted. I no longer felt like I was standing on the edge of something, I was already falling. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to stop myself. We stayed late again. The library was nearly empty, just the hum of overhead lights and the occasional soft footsteps of a janitor passing by. I didn't know why I was still there, not really. The notes were already done, the project well ahead of schedule. But neither of us made a move to leave. We just sat there, close but not touching, lost in our quiet space. She leaned forward to underline something in the textbook, her shoulder brushing mine. It was so light, so small, but I felt it like a current. I didn't move. I didn't want to. I watched her hand move, the way her fingers curled slightly at the edges of the page, how she pressed the pen down with just enough pressure. Everything about her felt intentional, like she was fully present in every moment. She turned slightly, her face just inches from mine now. "You're quieter tonight," she said softly. "I think I'm just feeling a lot," I answered, not looking away. She nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. "That's not a bad thing." There was a silence between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full of all the things we hadn't said. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly the space between us disappeared. Her hand reached for mine, slow, careful. I didn't pull away. Our fingers met, and everything felt still, like the world paused just to let me feel her skin against mine. My heart was loud in my chest, but my mind was quiet. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what came next, or what rules I might be breaking. I was just there, with her. She didn't kiss me. She didn't have to. The way she held my hand, the way her eyes searched mine, it said more than any words could. I could feel the warmth of her palm, steady and real. It grounded me. "You make it hard to remember the rules I made for myself," I said quietly, almost to myself. She smiled, not teasing, but soft and understanding. "Maybe the rules don't fit anymore." I didn't answer, but I didn't look away either. I let the moment happen. Let myself be open in a way I hadn't in years. She squeezed my hand gently, then let it go, as if to say it was my choice, always my choice. I stayed in that chair for a long time after she left, my hand still warm where hers had been. I felt something blooming inside me, slow and hesitant but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about her. It was about me, about the parts of myself I'd kept locked away. And now that they were waking up, I didn't want to put them back to sleep. I thought we'd stayed careful. Careful enough. But nothing stays hidden forever, not on a campus where whispers carry faster than wind. Someone must have seen us leave together that night. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just timing, or the look on my face. But the next day felt different. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations stopped when I walked into a room. I could feel it even when no one said a word. At first, I tried to ignore it. Buried myself in work. Pretended not to notice the shift in the air. But the silence wasn't empty. It was judgment, unspoken and sharp. And it followed me everywhere. I wanted to believe it didn't matter. That we'd been respectful, cautious, honest. But the truth was, people didn't need facts to start rumors. They only needed something they didn't understand. I started second-guessing everything. Every meeting with her, every conversation. Was I being foolish, naive? Was I risking too much? The rules I'd once followed now felt like traps, and yet I missed the comfort they gave me. I found myself pulling back, not from her, but from the world around us. When we met the next day, I couldn't hide the tension in my face. She noticed the moment she saw me. "What happened?" she asked gently, standing just far enough to give me space, but close enough to show she cared. "They're talking," I said quietly. She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. I looked at her, trying to find anger or frustration in her eyes. But all I saw was calm. She took a slow breath, then stepped closer. "Let them talk. It's not that easy," I whispered. "I know," she said. "But we don't owe them anything." I wanted to believe her. Wanted to carry that strength, that quiet defiance. But I wasn't built like her. I'd spent my life surviving by blending in, by being invisible when it mattered. Now, I felt exposed. Seen in ways I wasn't ready for. She reached for my hand again, like she had that night. Not to pull me forward, just to remind me she was still there. "You don't have to be ready," she said. "Just don't walk away." I didn't. I couldn't. Because even with all the fear swirling around me, I knew what I felt with her was real. And real things were worth standing up for. Later that week, we passed each other in a crowded hallway. She didn't stop, didn't smile, didn't even glance too long. But as we passed, her fingers brushed mine, just once, just enough. And it was all I needed. A reminder that some truths are worth holding onto, even when the world is watching. The invitation came quietly, almost like a test. A small gathering hosted by the department, a year-end celebration meant to recognize collaborative research efforts. Everyone would be there. Professors, students, assistants. I almost deleted the email. I didn't want the looks, the whispers, the sideways glances that had become part of my daily routine. But then I thought of her. Of everything we'd built quietly in between the noise. And I knew I had to go. I stood outside the building for a long minute before walking in. My hands were cold, my throat dry. But when I saw her across the room, talking, laughing, perfectly composed, I felt something settle in me. She looked over, saw me, and didn't smile in that obvious way. She just gave a small nod. The kind of gesture that meant, "You're not alone." I moved through the room slowly, trying not to shrink under the stares. A few people looked at me, then looked away. Some didn't bother hiding their curiosity. I focused on the table where she stood. As I got closer, she turned and held out a folder. "They want us to share a quick summary of our project," she said, voice easy, like this was just another day. I took it from her, heart still beating too fast. "Are you sure?" She looked at me then, really looked. "Only if you want to." I nodded. "Let's do it." When we stood at the front of the room, my voice was shaky at first. But she spoke calmly, clearly, and I followed her lead. We talked about empathy, about connection, about how emotional understanding improves collaborative environments. No one interrupted. No one laughed. They listened. At the end, there was a brief silence. Then applause. Polite, reserved, but real. It didn't erase the rumors or the discomfort, but it felt like a beginning. Later, after the room had started to thin out, I stood near the exit, watching her speak with another faculty member. I thought about leaving without a word. Thought about retreating to the quiet safety I once called home. But then she walked over, calm and unhurried. "You were brilliant," she said softly. I shook my head, unsure how to take the praise. You were, she repeated. You stood up there and told the truth. That matters. I looked at her, at the way she said things without needing anything back. And I felt the fear slowly loosen its grip on my chest. As we stepped out into the cool air, I reached for her hand, not caring who saw. She looked down at our fingers, then up at me with the same calm she'd always had. Like none of this surprised her. We walked side by side, not rushing, not hiding, just existing in the space we'd carved out, quietly, honestly, together. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was breaking the rules. I felt like I was finally living. Some stories don't need grand endings. They unfold in quiet steps, small choices, whispered truths shared between two people who dared to be seen. This wasn't about a fairy tale, or about perfection. It was about honesty, about learning to let go of fear, about allowing someone in, even when the world around you makes it feel unsafe. She never asked me to change. She never asked me to be anything more than I already was. And maybe that's what love really is. Someone standing beside you, not pushing, not pulling, just staying. Looking back, I don't remember the rumors, the stares, the weight of other people's opinions. I remember her voice, her quiet patience, the way she looked at me like I mattered, truly mattered. If you've ever found yourself scared to feel, scared to trust, I hope you remember this: the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be known. Even if your voice shakes. Even if the world watches. Thank you for listening to this story. If it made you feel something, anything, please share it. Leave a comment below if you've ever had your own moment like this, or just let me know you were here. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Subscribe if you want more quiet, real, human moments like this. And above all, remember, love doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just whispers, and that's more than enough.